Ladies and gentlemen, the concept of a witch has gripped the imagination of humanity for centuries, but who or what is the witch? This isn't merely a question of folklore. It's about understanding the mechanisms by which societies, groups, and individuals label and condemn what they fear. Today I want to outline 4 defining marks of a witch, not as an object of fantasy, but as a symbol of profound psychological and societal processes. 1. The outcast. The first mark of a witch is her or his status as the outsider. Throughout history, witches were often those who didn't fit into the established norms of their community. Perhaps they were too intelligent, too eccentric, or simply too different. The human psyche has a profound fear of the unfamiliar. It's easier to ostracize the other than to confront the shadow within ourselves that they represent. But what does this tell us about our nature? We crave order, and the outcast challenges that order. The witch is the embodiment of chaos encroaching on the fragile boundaries of our societal frameworks. 2. The keeper of forbidden knowledge. The second mark is knowledge, especially knowledge deemed dangerous or unapproved by prevailing authority. Historically, those accused of witchcraft often possessed skills or wisdom that threatened established hierarchies. Herbal medicine, spiritual practices, or even intellectual independence could brand someone a witch. Why do we fear knowledge? Because it disrupts comfort. The witch knows something we don't, and that imbalance creates tension. It's a stark reminder of our own ignorance and insecurity. And so instead of learning, we condemn the one who knows. 3. The target of projection. The third mark is projection. Witches are often scapegoats for the community's anxieties. When crops fail, when illness spreads, when misfortune strikes, it's far easier to blame a witch than to confront the harsh realities of existence. This mechanism persists today. Instead of witches, we have other labels for those we deem responsible for societal ills. And yet, the psychology remains the same. We externalize our fears and weaknesses, projecting them onto the witch, rather than addressing the flaws within our systems or ourselves. 4. The catalyst for transformation. The witch serves as a catalyst. Her presence forces the community to confront its values, its fears, and its limitations. In the best scenarios, this confrontation leads to growth and transformation. In the worst, it leads to destruction and stagnation. We cannot ignore this duality. The witch is a necessary figure, not because she deserves persecution, but because her existence reveals the cracks in the collective psyche. She is both a warning and an opportunity, a challenge to evolve beyond our primitive instincts of fear and blame. So what do we do with this knowledge? First, we must resist the urge to identify witches in our own time. We must ask ourselves, where am I projecting my own fears onto others? Where am I failing to take responsibility? And second, we must recognize the wisdom in the outsider, the power in the unconventional, and the growth that comes from facing the uncomfortable truths they reveal. The witch, then, is not merely a villain of the past. She is a mirror showing us who we are and who we might become if we dare to confront our own shadows. When we discuss the concept of a witch, it is crucial to clarify what we mean. Historically, the term has carried various connotations depending on the cultural, religious, and societal lens through which it was viewed. In medieval Europe, for instance, a witch was often depicted as a servant of dark forces, wielding malevolent power to harm others. This definition arose not from objective observation, but from the fears and superstitions of the time, shaped by religious doctrines that sought to explain misfortune in supernatural terms. The notion of a witch is not limited to a historical context. In psychological and symbolic frameworks, the witch represents something deeper, a personification of chaos, rebellion, or forbidden knowledge. She or he becomes a symbol of what society deems threatening or unmanageable. In this sense, a witch is not necessarily a literal figure, but an archetype representing the otherness that challenges established norms and structures. To fully grasp this idea, we must also recognize the fluidity of the term. A witch in one society might be a healer in another. In some cultures, individuals with unique wisdom or spiritual insight were revered rather than reviled. This duality reveals a profound truth. The label witch is not inherently about the individual, but about the society that assigns it. It reflects collective anxieties, prejudices, and the need to define boundaries between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. By understanding these layers of meaning, we can see that the concept of a witch is as much about human psychology as it is about history or culture. It speaks to our innate fear of the unknown, our discomfort with those who defy conventions, and our tendency to create scapegoats in times of uncertainty. This clarity is vital as we navigate not just historical narratives, but also modern parallels, where the same dynamics play out under different labels. The concept of a witch has deep historical roots, woven into the fabric of societies across the world. In the Middle Ages and early modern period, particularly in Europe, the idea of witchcraft was closely tied to religious and social frameworks. Witches were often accused of making pacts with the devil, casting spells to harm others, or disrupting the natural order. These accusations were not arbitrary, but reflected the collective anxieties of communities grappling with uncertainty, disease, famine, and other hardships. When life's difficulties felt inexplicable, the figure of the witch became a convenient explanation, a tangible target for fears that might otherwise have been unmanageable. Beyond Europe, witchcraft held different connotations. In African, Native American, and indigenous cultures, the idea of someone wielding spiritual or magical power was often treated with more nuance. While some practices might have been viewed as dangerous, others were respected as part of a shamanic tradition or spiritual practice. This divergence highlights how the historical role of witches is not universally one of villainy, but is deeply influenced by cultural narratives and power dynamics. The witch trials that swept through Europe and colonial America, however, represent one of the most infamous chapters in this history. These events were driven by a toxic mix of religious fervor, political manipulation, and social control. Leaders often exploited accusations of witchcraft to silence dissent, eliminate rivals, or consolidate authority. For the accused, the charges were almost always a death sentence, even when evidence was non-existent or absurd. These historical instances reveal a broader pattern. Witches were rarely condemned for what they did, but for what they symbolized. They became vessels for the fears of their societies, a way to externalize and combat perceived threats to the moral or social order. Yet, in doing so, societies often destroyed some of their most innovative, independent, or unconventional members. This suppression of difference, cloaked in the language of morality and justice, serves as a warning about the dangers of unchecked fear and collective hysteria. Understanding this historical perspective allows us to see how the concept of the witch has evolved but also persisted in various forms. It underscores how deeply rooted the human need is to identify and marginalize those who challenge or unsettle the status quo. The figure of the witch holds profound moral symbolism, acting as a mirror reflecting a society's deepest fears and values. In many cultures, witches are portrayed as individuals who defy established norms, often embodying qualities that are considered threatening or subversive. Their actions and attributes, real or imagined, become symbols of moral transgression, serving as cautionary tales about the consequences of stepping outside the bounds of accepted behavior. At a deeper level, witches often symbolize the human struggle between good and evil, order and chaos. They are cast as antagonists to the moral frameworks upheld by their communities, accused of disrupting harmony or undermining the natural order. This depiction reflects an intrinsic need to define and defend what is deemed morally right, often by contrasting it with an archetype of wrongness. In this way, the witch becomes a scapegoat for all that a society seeks to repress or control, embodying the collective shadow, the traits and desires that communities refuse to acknowledge within themselves. This moral symbolism also extends to the personal level. The witch represents the forbidden aspects of the human psyche: curiosity, ambition, and defiance of authority. These qualities, while often vilified, are also the very traits that drive progress and transformation. The paradox of the witch lies in this duality. She is both the villain and the catalyst, feared for her capacity to disrupt, but essential for her ability to provoke growth. By labeling certain individuals as witches, societies not only enforce conformity but also draw boundaries around their moral codes. The process of identifying a witch, then, is not just about punishing deviance but about reinforcing collective identity. However, this comes at a cost. The moral symbolism of the witch reveals as much about the accuser as it does about the accused, exposing the fragility and contradictions within a society's ethical framework. Through this lens, the witch is more than a historical figure or mythical character. She is a symbol of the tensions that exist within every culture and individual. She reminds us of the dangers of moral absolutism and the necessity of confronting the darker aspects of ourselves with courage and understanding. The concept of projection and scapegoating is central to understanding why certain individuals or groups are labeled as witches. Projection occurs when people attribute their own fears, insecurities, or undesirable traits to others, often unconsciously. This psychological mechanism allows individuals to disown aspects of themselves that they find troubling or unacceptable. In the context of witchcraft accusations, those deemed witches became vessels for the collective fears and anxieties of their communities, serving as a convenient outlet for blame. Scapegoating takes this process further by focusing collective attention and punishment on a single individual or group. When societies face crises such as plagues, failed harvests, or unexplained misfortunes, they often look for someone to hold accountable. The witch, marked as an outsider or seen as possessing mysterious powers, becomes the perfect scapegoat. By casting blame on the witch, the community seeks to restore a sense of control over chaotic and threatening circumstances. This dynamic is not merely historical but deeply rooted in human psychology. It reflects a tendency to externalize internal conflicts, projecting them onto those who appear different or threatening. A community might accuse a woman with unorthodox beliefs, a healer with unconventional methods, or a neighbor with personal grievances of witchcraft, not because of any real danger, but because they represent something the community cannot face within itself. The danger of projection and scapegoating lies in its ability to create a false sense of unity and righteousness. By rallying against a perceived enemy, communities temporarily alleviate their fears and reinforce their social cohesion. However, this comes at the expense of truth, justice, and compassion. The individuals targeted as witches often become the victims of collective hysteria, stripped of their humanity and subjected to horrific punishments. Projection and scapegoating also reveal a profound moral failure, the unwillingness to confront the root causes of fear and suffering. Rather than addressing systemic issues or embracing personal responsibility, communities deflect blame onto an external target. This pattern persists in modern forms, where labels and accusations are used to marginalize those who challenge the status quo or embody difference. Understanding this mechanism calls for self-awareness and humility. It challenges us to examine where we might be projecting our own fears onto others and invites us to resist the urge to scapegoat in moments of crisis. Only by confronting these tendencies can we hope to build societies grounded in truth and mutual understanding. Power and knowledge are intimately connected to the concept of the witch, as those labeled as witches were often individuals who possessed knowledge or abilities that set them apart from the rest of society. This knowledge, whether it pertained to healing, herbal medicine, spiritual practices, or other forms of wisdom, frequently inspired both awe and fear. In many cases, it was not the knowledge itself that led to accusations of witchcraft, but the perception that this knowledge gave the individual power over others or over natural forces. Societies throughout history have been deeply ambivalent about power, especially when it is wielded by those who fall outside traditional structures of authority. In patriarchal systems, for example, women who demonstrated intellectual or spiritual independence were often viewed with suspicion. Their knowledge threatened the established order, challenging the norms that dictated who could hold and exercise power. The witch, then, became a symbol of this unease and archetype of the individual who wields influence in ways that society cannot fully understand or control. This dynamic reveals a broader truth about how societies manage the relationship between power and knowledge. Those who hold power often seek to regulate or suppress unconventional knowledge because it poses a challenge to their authority. The witch hunts of Europe and colonial America exemplify this, as accusations of witchcraft were frequently directed at individuals who operated on the margins of acceptable practices, whether as midwives, herbalists, or mystics. These people were not necessarily dangerous, but their autonomy and expertise disrupted the established order, making them targets of fear and suspicion. The fear of witches often stemmed from the belief that their knowledge could be used malevolently. This belief reflects a deep-seated human anxiety about the dual nature of power. It can heal or harm, create or destroy. Witches were seen as those who misused their knowledge for personal gain or to harm others, embodying society's fears about the destructive potential of unchecked power. At the same time, the persecution of witches also served as a means of consolidating power for those in authority. By accusing and punishing so-called witches, leaders reinforced their own control and suppressed dissenting voices. This pattern underscores how the fear of witches was as much about maintaining social and political hierarchies as it was about addressing any real or imagined threat. The association of witches with power and knowledge reminds us of the human tendency to fear what we do not understand. It challenges us to question how we respond to those who possess unconventional wisdom or skills. Do we seek to learn from them, or do we attempt to suppress what we perceive as threatening? The history of witchcraft teaches us that our reactions to knowledge and power reveal not only our strengths but also our insecurities and limitations. Envy and fear have always played a central role in the phenomenon of labeling individuals as witches. These emotions, deeply rooted in human nature, often arise in response to qualities or circumstances that provoke discomfort or insecurity in others. The witch, as an archetype, embodies this dynamic, becoming a projection of the envy and fear that simmer within a community. Envy emerges when individuals perceive the witch as possessing something they lack, whether it be knowledge, influence, beauty, independence, or success. For example, a midwife skilled in childbirth or a healer adept with herbs might inspire admiration. But this admiration can quickly sour into envy if others feel overshadowed or inadequate by comparison. This envy becomes particularly potent in tightly knit communities where resources and status are limited and competition is high. Fear, on the other hand, is often tied to the mysterious or the unknown. The witch's supposed powers, whether real or imagined, represent a break from the ordinary and the predictable. This unpredictability breeds unease as people struggle to comprehend or control what they do not understand. Historically, witches were accused of causing illness, crop failure, or personal misfortune, events that were often inexplicable given the scientific knowledge of the time. By attributing these events to a witch, communities found a way to channel their fear into a tangible form, even if it meant condemning an innocent person. The interplay of envy and fear creates a powerful psychological cocktail that fuels the persecution of witches. Envy amplifies feelings of resentment toward those who are different or exceptional, while fear justifies actions to neutralize the perceived threat. Together, they drive the need to ostracize or eliminate the witch, reinforcing social conformity and suppressing individuality. This dynamic is particularly evident in the historical targeting of women as witches, especially those who lived outside traditional societal roles. Independent women, whether financially secure widows, skilled healers, or outspoken critics of authority, often faced accusations of witchcraft. Their autonomy and success, in a world that valued conformity and male dominance, provoked envy and fear among those who felt threatened by their presence. Even today, the legacy of these emotions persists. Modern equivalents of witch hunts can be seen in the ways people ostracize or criticize individuals who defy norms or achieve exceptional success. Envy and fear remain potent forces, driving both personal and collective responses to those who stand apart. Recognizing the role of envy and fear in these dynamics is essential for personal growth and societal progress. It calls for self-awareness to examine where envy clouds our judgment or where fear prevents us from embracing difference. Only by confronting these emotions can we move beyond the impulse to scapegoat and toward a more inclusive and compassionate understanding of one another. Gender dynamics play a significant and often overlooked role in the historical and symbolic portrayal of witches. The vast majority of individuals accused of witchcraft throughout history were women, reflecting deeply ingrained societal attitudes toward gender, power, and autonomy. Understanding this dynamic sheds light on how cultural systems have used the figure of the witch as a tool for controlling and suppressing women, particularly those who defied conventional roles. Historically, women were expected to conform to specific societal norms that defined their value primarily in terms of their roles as caregivers, mothers, and obedient wives. Those who deviated from these expectations, whether through independence, intellect, or unconventional behavior, were often viewed with suspicion. A woman who chose not to marry, who demonstrated financial or emotional self-sufficiency, or who possessed knowledge in areas like healing or herbal medicine stood out in a way that threatened the established patriarchal order. In such cases, accusations of witchcraft became a convenient way to marginalize or punish these women, reinforcing the notion that stepping outside traditional roles was dangerous and undesirable. The association of witches with femininity also reveals societal fears about women's perceived power. Throughout history, women's connection to nature, fertility, and nurturing was often mystified, leading to both reverence and fear. This duality is evident in the portrayal of witches as figures who could either heal or harm, reflecting a male-dominated society's ambivalence about women's roles. The idea that women could wield unseen or mystical power, often outside the control of men, was deeply unsettling and contributed to the narrative that such power was inherently dangerous. Witch trials, particularly during the height of the European witch hunts, exposed the stark gendered nature of these dynamics. Women were disproportionately accused and executed, often based on flimsy or entirely fabricated evidence. Older women, widows, or those without male protectors were especially vulnerable, as their marginal status made them easy targets. The trials served not only as a mechanism for societal scapegoating, but also as a means of enforcing patriarchal control, eliminating women who were perceived as too outspoken, too knowledgeable, or too independent. This gendered persecution was further fueled by religious ideologies that portrayed women as morally weaker and more susceptible to temptation, a view rooted in interpretations of stories like that of Eve in the Garden of Eden. These narratives reinforced the belief that women needed to be controlled and that their power, whether physical, intellectual, or spiritual, was something to fear and suppress. Even in contemporary society, echoes of these dynamics persist. Women who assert themselves in traditionally male-dominated spaces, or who challenge societal expectations, often face criticism, or are labeled in ways that echo the historical treatment of witches. Terms like bossy, aggressive, or difficult are frequently used to undermine women who demonstrate strength or ambition, illustrating how deeply these patterns are ingrained in cultural consciousness. Recognizing the role of gender dynamics in the witch archetype invites a broader reflection on how societies have historically treated women who defy norms and how these patterns continue today. It challenges us to confront the biases that shape our perceptions of power and to create a culture that values and respects women's autonomy and contributions without resorting to fear or suppression. Only by addressing these underlying issues can we move toward a more equitable understanding of gender and power. The archetype of the witch, though historically rooted in specific cultural and religious contexts, continues to resonate in modern society through various parallels. While the literal witch hunts of the past are no longer prevalent, the psychological, social, and cultural dynamics that drove them remain deeply embedded in human behavior. Today, modern witch hunts take on metaphorical forms, manifesting as collective scapegoating, ostracism, and the marginalization of individuals or groups who challenge societal norms or hold unconventional beliefs. One prominent parallel lies in the way society treats those who are perceived as different or threatening to the status quo. In workplaces, communities, and social media platforms, individuals who express dissenting opinions or challenge existing power structures often face backlash. These modern witches may not practice magic, but they disrupt societal norms in ways that provoke discomfort or fear. Accusations, much like those in historical witch trials, are often based on rumor, bias, or exaggerated claims rather than concrete evidence. The rise of cancel culture, for example, reflects this phenomenon, where individuals are publicly vilified or ostracized for their actions or beliefs, sometimes without a fair opportunity to defend themselves. Social media has amplified this dynamic, creating digital arenas where accusations spread rapidly and collective outrage builds momentum. The anonymity and immediacy of online interactions often encourage mob behavior, where individuals are judged, shamed, or burned, metaphorically in the court of public opinion. While accountability for harmful actions is important, the lack of nuance in these processes echoes the hysteria of historical witch hunts, where fear and emotion overpowered reason and fairness. The parallels extend beyond individuals to include groups or communities that are viewed with suspicion or hostility. Immigrants, religious minorities, and marginalized populations are often subjected to modern forms of scapegoating, blamed for societal problems in ways that mirror how witches were blamed for misfortunes like failed crops or illnesses. This tendency to project collective anxieties onto a vulnerable other is a persistent theme in human history, highlighting the enduring need for societies to find external sources of blame during times of uncertainty or crisis. Gender dynamics also play a significant role in these modern parallels. Women who assert themselves in professional or public spheres often face criticism or are labeled in ways that diminish their authority or character. Terms like bossy, shrill, or unlikable serve as modern equivalents of the accusations faced by women in historical witch hunts. These labels are rooted in the same societal discomfort with women who defy traditional roles or wield power independently. The fear of the unknown or misunderstood continues to drive prejudice and exclusion. This is evident in the stigmatization of alternative lifestyles, non-traditional spiritual practices, or even scientific advancements that challenge existing paradigms. Those who advocate for change or who operate outside mainstream systems often encounter resistance and suspicion, much like the healers and mystics of old who were accused of witchcraft. Modern parallels also appear in the commodification and romanticization of the witch archetype. The rise of popular culture representations of witches seen in literature, film, and fashion reflects a reclaiming of the witch as a symbol of empowerment and rebellion. This reinterpretation contrasts sharply with the historical fear and persecution of witches, signaling a cultural shift toward embracing individuality and challenging societal norms. However, this reclamation also highlights the tension between celebrating the archetype and addressing the historical realities of those who suffered under its label. Understanding these modern parallels is crucial for fostering a more compassionate and just society. It challenges us to examine the ways we collectively treat those who are different, unconventional, or disruptive, and to question the mechanisms by which we assign blame or enforce conformity. By learning from the mistakes of the past and recognizing the echoes of those mistakes in the present, we can strive to build a culture that values diversity, encourages critical thinking, and resists the urge to scapegoat or marginalize. Individual responsibility plays a crucial role in understanding and addressing the dynamics of scapegoating, projection, and marginalization, whether in the context of historical witch hunts or their modern parallels. While societal pressures and collective fears often drive the persecution of those labeled as witches, these actions are made possible by the choices of individuals. Recognizing and embracing personal accountability is essential to breaking the cycle of fear, blame, and injustice that has persisted throughout history. At the core of individual responsibility is the willingness to examine one's own biases, fears, and motivations. Historical witch hunts were fueled by individuals who, either consciously or unconsciously, projected their insecurities onto others. This projection allowed them to avoid facing uncomfortable truths about themselves by externalizing those feelings onto a scapegoat. In modern times, the same psychological mechanisms are at play when people participate in acts of exclusion, defamation, or collective outrage without questioning their own role in perpetuating harm. Individual responsibility also requires the courage to resist social pressure. In historical contexts, many people accused others of witchcraft not because they genuinely believed in the accusations, but because it was easier to conform to the dominant narrative than to stand against it. The fear of being ostracized or targeted themselves often drove individuals to remain silent or even actively participate in the persecution. This dynamic remains relevant today, as people face similar pressures in workplaces, communities, and online platforms to align with majority opinions or movements, even when they suspect those actions might be unjust. Critical thinking is another vital component of individual responsibility. The willingness to question evidence, challenge assumptions, and seek truth is essential to preventing the spread of false accusations or harmful narratives. In the context of both historical and modern witch hunts, a lack of skepticism allowed hysteria to flourish. Individuals must take responsibility for the information they consume, share, and act upon, ensuring it is rooted in fact, rather than fear or prejudice. Empathy and self-awareness are equally important. When individuals fail to recognize the humanity of those they accuse or marginalize, they contribute to the dehumanization that makes persecution possible. Taking responsibility means actively cultivating empathy for others, even those who seem different or challenging. It also involves reflecting on how personal fears, insecurities, or desires for control might influence one's actions and judgments. In modern settings, individual responsibility extends to the digital realm, where the anonymity and speed of communication can exacerbate harmful behaviors. The temptation to join online witch hunts, pile onto public criticism, or spread unverified accusations is significant. Here, personal accountability involves pausing to consider the potential impact of one's actions, resisting the urge to follow the crowd, and striving to engage in constructive rather than destructive dialogue. Individual responsibility is about recognizing the power and consequences of one's choices. It calls for a commitment to fairness, integrity, and courage in the face of societal pressures. By embracing this responsibility, individuals can act as a counterbalance to collective hysteria, ensuring that justice and compassion prevail over fear and blame. In doing so, they contribute to a more equitable and understanding society, one that learns from the mistakes of the past rather than repeating them. The path to redemption is a deeply personal and collective journey that involves the restoration of justice, healing of wounds, and the transformation of destructive patterns that perpetuate fear, guilt, and blame. In the context of witch hunts, both historical and modern, the concept of redemption is particularly significant because it addresses the harm caused by the collective forces of projection, scapegoating, and moral panic. Redemption requires not only the healing of those who have been wronged, but also the transformation of those who have been complicit in or passive toward the wrongs inflicted upon others. At an individual level, the path to redemption begins with self-reflection and a willingness to confront past mistakes. For those who have either participated in or remained silent during the persecution of others, whether through active persecution or by perpetuating harmful narratives, redemption requires an acknowledgement of the harm caused. This involves understanding the emotional and psychological mechanisms that fueled the injustices, such as envy, fear, or ignorance, and confronting those inner tendencies with honesty and humility. Redemption is not about self-flagellation, but rather about taking responsibility for one's actions and committing to a course of action that leads to repair and reconciliation. For those who have been marginalized or wronged, the path to redemption involves healing and reclaiming their dignity. Historically, individuals accused of witchcraft were often victims of dehumanization, stripped of their identities and subjected to violence or exile. Redemption, in this case, means restoring the humanity of those individuals and offering opportunities for them to reclaim their lives, their voices, and their worth. It also involves challenging the societal structures that enabled their persecution and dismantling the ideologies that led to their scapegoating. In modern times, those who have been wronged, whether through discrimination, public shaming, or other forms of marginalization, can find redemption in seeking justice, healing, and recognition. Redemption also requires a societal shift in how we view power, knowledge, and difference. As long as societies continue to scapegoat individuals who are seen as other, redemption cannot be fully realized. It is necessary for communities to collectively work toward creating more just, inclusive, and compassionate systems where diversity is not feared but celebrated, and where people are not vilified for their differences. This transformation involves educating communities about the dangers of projection and scapegoating, fostering empathy, and encouraging critical thinking in order to prevent future cycles of harm. The concept of forgiveness plays a pivotal role in the path to redemption. For individuals and communities alike, redemption is not complete without the ability to forgive, both oneself and others. Forgiveness is not the same as excusing past wrongs, rather, it is the act of releasing the hold that past injustices have over us and choosing to break the cycle of resentment and retribution. By forgiving others for their role in perpetuating harm, one opens the possibility for healing, reconciliation, and a renewed sense of collective unity. Similarly, forgiving oneself is essential to freeing oneself from guilt and shame, allowing individuals to move forward with integrity and a renewed commitment to justice and empathy. In modern contexts, the path to redemption can also involve public acknowledgement of harm and the making of reparations. Whether through formal apologies, legal reforms, or efforts to amplify marginalized voices, redemption requires concrete actions that demonstrate a commitment to correcting past injustices. This can take the form of legal justice, but it also involves social recognition and the creation of spaces for those who have been wronged to tell their stories, be heard, and reclaim their sense of agency. Redemption is not a destination, but a process, a continuous effort to foster personal growth, societal transformation, and collective healing. It requires a commitment to truth, empathy, justice, and humility. It also demands courage, the courage to confront uncomfortable truths, to challenge long-held beliefs, and to break free from the destructive patterns that perpetuate harm. As individuals and societies move along the path to redemption, they not only heal from past wounds, but also create a more just and compassionate future, one in which the specter of witch hunts, whether literal or metaphorical, no longer holds power over the lives of those who dare to be different.